Indie movies. The lower budget, independent films of cinema. For a long period of my life, I never really considered indie movies worth watching. For me, it was always the big budget movies that got my attention. Films like The Avengers, Star Wars, and Harry Potter. All big budget movies with tons of action, special effects, and large scale plots. They're the ones that I found myself the most drawn to. They were enjoyable pieces of entertainment, and at the time, I felt that was all I really needed. Now, this wasn't to say I couldn't find value in the writing or direction of these movies, but for the most part, I just saw cinema as an easy way to turn my brain off and have some fun. That was until 2018, when I saw this.
I know it's kind of a weird time, but I was just wondering, what is going to happen to us on Monday when we're all together again? I mean, I consider you guys my friends. I'm not wrong, am I? No.
The Breakfast Club, written by John Hughes, was the first movie I saw that truly made me connect with what was going on in the story. I wasn't watching some big CGI fight scene or a long exposition dump taking place in front of me. I was watching people who were dealing with insecurities and anxieties going on in their lives, people who antagonize each other only to then bond over their experiences, people who by the end change and develop. Before watching The Breakfast Club, I only saw movies as a form of escapism. After watching that movie, I see that they can be used as a form of connection. This experience led me to watching other indie movies, such as The Perks of Being a Wallflower, Lost in Translation, and Reservoir Dogs, all of which taught me new lessons and gave me more clarity than I had previously. I still love big-budget action-adventure movies, but nowadays I tend to lean towards the medium of indie films because I'm just more invested in them. For me, the main draws of indie movies come down to three important aspects: style, realism, and emotional connection. To start, let's talk about the first reason. Oftentimes, when movies are distributed by a big film company, chances are there might be restrictions on what the filmmaker could do. This is actually a main complaint for the Marvel movies, as they get ragged on for being too visually and tonally similar. Now, this isn't to say I dislike the MCU or anything. I still really like their movies, and I think in more recent years they have begun to let directors do what they want with their projects. However, they have played it safe on numerous occasions, and while Marvel itself isn't entirely guilty of this, as there are multiple other big studios that do this as well, it still goes to show that bigger budget movies tend to have a lot more safety nets attached to them. For films operating on a lower budget distributed by companies willing to take chances, the filmmaker's creativity is more likely to shine through. This could mean the incorporation of different shots, different storytelling techniques, and different visual presentation. And while it might not make the film better as a whole, it does add personality as opposed to a shot reverse shot bland looking movie. So while style might not be the biggest factor that draws people into the movies, I would argue that it is a very important aspect, and one that does leave a memorable impression if done right. The next reason is a bit of a contrast to the first one, and that's realism. Now obviously not every indie movie is completely realistic. I mean, you can't really go around comparing Kung Fury to something like Ladybird. But a good portion of them are, so I thought it was a nice point to add. Because this realistic quality pulls us in differently than other big budget films would. In larger scale movies, the audience often takes the position of an outsider, seeing the supernatural or science fiction elements unfold in front of them. Whereas in an indie film, events are usually things that can be found in real life, and as a result, we as an audience feel more involved. Like high school, family, or crime movies all feel like they could happen in our world. Even horror films in some cases feel as though they can work. A good example of this is the 2014 film Creep. The found footage aspect of this movie really brings the tension to the forefront, as you are experiencing the horror from basically the first person perspective, as seen through the main character's camera. And the fact that the main antagonist of this movie isn't some supernatural demon or undead zombie, but rather a real person, actually makes things scarier, because in reality, this could probably happen to you. Now, I'm not saying this realistic quality is more of a pull than bigger budget movies. Each has their own strengths and draws to them. But I find this realistic quality does allow for greater investment. But I will acknowledge the realistic quality of indie movies by themselves is probably not the biggest intrigue factor. A story can still be realistic, but has the possibility of being boring, leading to arguably the biggest draw of indie movies: the emotion. Now, this does not mean that larger productions can't have scenes that make you feel powerful emotions. It's just indie movies are able to usually do it better. What makes an indie movie so engaging are its characters, as they are not only the driving force behind the plot, but also represent the plot itself. A lot of indie films will have its characters dealing with issues in their life, and as an audience, we connect with them due to the fact that what happens to the characters in these movies feels like it can happen to us. We could be struggling with what college we want to get into. We could be dealing with problems that keep us from moving forward. We could be looking for ways to express ourselves. Emotions such as loneliness, sadness, and confusion are all feelings we have felt before and are going to feel more of in the future. But with them comes joy, excitement, and empowerment. At the end of the day, while these films allow us to reminisce or resonate, the importance is really the lessons we take away from them and how we can improve ourselves. I'm currently taking an internship class, and in one of my lessons, my teacher talked about the passion which we should bring into our interviewing. And one of the most powerful things my teacher brought up was a quote by American poet, memoirist, and civil rights activist Maya Angelou. "I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel." I bring this up because for me, it's the same case for indie movies. We might forget what the characters talked about, we might forget the journey they went on or how their story ended. But when it's all said and done, we will never forget how we felt watching them. Delighted, distraught, invigorated, tense, furious, confident. We will never forget these feelings. In all honesty, I wouldn't have it any other way.